So for this week of Cyber School, we're going to be covering both the InformaCast and the SIP variants of our speakers. For our speakers, we've got both a standard version and a talkback variant. And of course, that's available in both the InformaCast enabled and the non-InformaCast enabled version. So we'll be covering 4 speakers in total here. And then there are other permutations of the ones that you can buy that are mounted together. So first off, what does a SIP speaker do? A SIP speaker is, depending on if it's a talkback or a non-talkback option, it doubles as a one-way or a two-way audio endpoint. So it gives a great way to give different announcements and make announcements and even have conversations depending on the capabilities of that particular speaker. It comes with a wide variety of mounting options, so it can be installed in really just about any different type of environment, whether it's, say, an office area where you've got drop tile ceilings, or a standard classroom environment where you do a wall mount, or even some garages or shops where you're dealing with cinder block walls and you can utilize a conduit mount. So with a variety of mounting options, the SIP speakers are ideal for any type of environment, whether pretty much indoors only, but great for any type of indoor environment that you could put them into. They only need PoE power to use, and of course, since you're going to be supplying that PoE or power over Ethernet power, they'll also have that data connection. Of course, they're going to need to be on the network. That's kind of a given with any kind of CyberData products, but they are just standard PoE powered to use. Other nice features that the SIP speakers have, whether they're the InformaCast enabled variant or the standard SIP speakers, they've got stored message playback. So that allows the capability for an individual speaker to play an audio file that was loaded on it for a particular area. So if you're dealing with, say, one speaker in a given area and you just want to make an announcement out of that, say a break room to let people know that there's a morning huddle that's going to occur, it's a great way to do that. It's also got paging and night ringer extensions, so that way if you need to make dedicated announcements through an individual speaker, you can call the paging extension, or you can add the night ringer extension to different ring groups, so it rings in addition to all of the other phones or other equipment that will be in that ring group, so you get that additional auditory notification. It does support simultaneous SIP and multicast, so that way you can receive multicast broadcasts or messages across the network from products like the CyberData SIP paging server or the CyberData multicast microphone, in addition to just about any VoIP phone off the shelf. Pretty much all standard VoIP SIP compliant phones support multicast, so there's a variety of sources that can send the multicast, which can be received by the speakers. And then, of course, if you get a product that's has the InformaCast enabled capability, either the one-way option, part number 011396, or the two-way option, the 011400, it comes with all that features and the nice little InformaCast cherry dropped on top. So why would you want to use a speaker? Of course, speakers are great, for just paging and notification in different areas. So they're very versatile for that, but they also come with a wide variety of mounting options. So they're perfect for areas where if you need to mount them in a classroom, in a school, in a break room, in a metal shop or a wood shop, if schools still even have those, gives you a lot of capabilities to use there, and it makes them very versatile and great to go into pretty much any environment. The speakers also have a wide variety of accessory options in comparison to a lot of CyberData products, or really just in general IP-based speakers across the entire industry as a whole. Our products have a ton of different accessories that can easily integrate with them, and that's one of the big pluses to our speakers. They're, of course, designed specifically for indoor use in classrooms or offices, so they're well suited to drop into any classroom, whether that's K through 12, or even, at a collegiate level, they're perfect for that, or even just regular offices for sales areas, support areas. We use them all around CyberData. They're great for different multiple options if you need to do talkback as well. Say, and for talkback, just in general, we've got a lot of different options that we'll get to a little bit later in terms of how to actually control the talkback. They can be kind of a standard full duplex, what you would expect from your standard speakerphone on your cell phone. You press the speaker option on your iPhone. We've got, essentially a mode that's similar to that. We've got 2 different variants of push-to-talk capability, as well as Vox and AEC, or acoustic echo cancellation. So there's a huge variety of talkback options when you're using the speaker. So it makes the speaker a great option if you're trying to do paging in really any environment. Now, where would you want to use these speakers? Of course, these are designed specifically for indoor environments. They're not IP rated like a lot of our other products, so you're definitely not going to want to use them outside. But like I said earlier, they were designed specifically for uses in classrooms and offices, so they're really designed and well applicated to those particular environments. But they're also good in other areas, in indoor settings like hallways, break rooms, lunch rooms, and cafeterias. Very well suited, pretty much for anywhere in a school environment. Of course, not outdoors. When you buy any of our speakers, generally, say if you're buying, for example, just our standard one-way speaker, you're buying the speaker by itself. You're not actually buying the speaker with a mounting kit. That gives you the capability to put your speaker into really any environment, and you get to choose the perfect mounting options for it. So they can, of course, be mounted on their own. They are included with some regular drywall screws, and you can cut a giant circle into your drywall and mount them directly in the wall. But that can be cumbersome, and then, down the road, if you do need to upgrade the speakers in the future, hopefully our speakers, 10 years from now are the exact same size, and you don't need to, cut a different size hole. We generally recommend against just cutting and mounting the speaker directly in the drywall itself. You can do that, but we don't necessarily recommend that. We would recommend getting one of our wall kits that either come with just a regular wall mount like we have pictured here, or a clock mount kit that's available. And I'll show in a couple other pictures. But they also come in just a regular ceiling tile drop-in that can be either a 1x2 or the new 2x2 option. We were getting a lot of requests for that, so we did add in a 2x2 option for our ceiling tile drop-ins. We've also got a conduit mount options for areas where it's really not easy to go and install a regular wall mount. Say if you're dealing with an auto shop, a metal shop, a wood shop, where you're going to typically have cinder block walls. You're not going to have, say, drywall or other areas where it's easy to install a speaker and mount different things. So that way we've got conduit mounts. So that way you don't have to deal with actually mounting something directly to the wall itself. Now, to kind of go over some proper installation techniques, for a wall mount, it's pretty much the same for the standard non-clock kit wall mount or the clock kit wall mount that we have pictured here. But generally, when you're going to be mounting one of these, you want to install the back plate to the wall first and foremost, of course, after you cut a hole in the drywall to route all your cabling through, or you could use one of the punch outs that's on the bottom of on the top of the wall mount itself. So that way, if you're in an area where you can't run the cables through the walls, you can route them directly through the top of the panel itself. But after mounting the back plate to the wall, you mount the speaker into the front face plate of the wall mount, connect a little cable when applicable, say for the clock kit here, and then you install the entire basically front face plate unit onto the back box to actually hold it all on there. And it's just installed with 4 simple screws to mount the face plate to the back plate. So it's a really, really easy installation process. It can pretty much be done by just about anybody. If you're comfortable with a screwdriver, you should be good to go. Next, to talk about conduit mounting. So with conduit mounting, you're going to be using, we recommend a 1/2-inch conduit, but there's other ways that you could say get a connector and go from a 3/4 inch or even a 1/4 inch, or an inch conduit to taper down into a 1/2-inch conduit. But for the actual connector to connect to the conduit mount itself, you will need a 1/2-inch connector, which is supplied. But to go and mount it, you basically mount the conduit back plate to whatever surface you like, or directly through the conduit itself. But do take caution if you just mount it solely to the conduit itself. There will be weight on the conduit, so you'll want to take any necessary precautions if you go that route, and not actually secure it to a wall or a back plate. But after that, then you simply just install the speaker using the 3 screws that are on the front faceplate of the speaker into the conduit mount itself. It makes it a really easy process, and it makes it really versatile for pretty much any environment. There's plenty of knockouts that are available on the back box of the conduit mount, so no matter where you need to actually mount it, or if you need to have multiple conduits running through it, it's a very, very easy thing to facilitate with the 4 conduit knockouts that we have on the conduit mount. And then finally, we'll get to the ceiling tile installation. The ceiling tile installation is pretty simple, and it's very similar across the board for the 1x2 or the 2x2. But for this image, we'll just have the 2x2 pictured here. I do believe somebody's mic is not muted. If you could, please mute yourself. Thank you. So to go through here, you've got different cross tees or cross members that will actually be held in the ceiling itself. So that way the ceiling tile sits nicely and flush with the rest of the mounts. But really all you'll need to do is just run the cabling over to it and then lift up one of the seismic tether brackets, ideally both of them, so that way if you have an earthquake, you don't have it dangling from a single bracket, you've got it hung from both sides. But you just simply mount an eye bolt into the joist that goes up across the top of the ceiling and simply connect some steel wire in between the kind of seismic tether bracket and the eye bolt to actually secure that so it doesn't fall in the event of an earthquake. You know, that's something that we have to deal with out here at CyberData. We are based in California, so we kind of have to be concerned about seismic stuff, just being in the California area. That's one thing that we deal with. So now that we've kind of covered why you would use the speaker, where you would use it, and how to mount it, let's talk about how you're actually going to use the speaker. So to use the speaker, of course, you can just call the direct SIP extension, what we identify as the primary extension, to make SIP calls directly through the speaker itself. So, for example, if you need to make an announcement in the lunchroom and you've just got a single speaker in there, you can just dial, say, for example, 123 to dial the speaker of that particular lunchroom and make an announcement. And if it is a talkback variant of one of our speakers, you can actually have a full conversation with the people that are around that speaker. So it's very versatile in that regard. We've also got the Night Ringer extension. So the Night Ringer extension, normally you wouldn't just call it directly because all the extension does is ring. And if you need to just call something to ring it, that's not really applicable. But the best use cases for that are using it in ring groups. So that way you get the additional auditory notification of an incoming call coming in. Because sometimes, you know, people will turn down the ringer on their desk phones or even their soft client, or they may have a headset that they use for their soft client, and all the audio is being routed through their headset. I know that's happened to me. I primarily use a soft client, you know, for my phone system. And, you know, if I get a call and it's going through my headset and I don't have my headset on, I got no idea that the call's ringing. So having different devices with a Night Ringer extension in a ring group just provides that additional auditory notification of a call coming in. So that makes it perfect for areas where they'll normally be taking sales calls or support calls. We did use that for quite a long time in our support department. We had that tied with a strobe kit that we'll get to a little bit later, just for that additional auditory and visual notification of an incoming call. Multicast is also a really great way to utilize the speakers because, of course, when you're dealing with a paging extension, it really gets down to which particular phone system you're using if you can make a one-to-many call. So typically when you're dealing with a SIP call, you know, picking up your standard, you know, Cisco phone, your Yealink phone, your Grandstream, and you call a different extension, you're making a one-to-one SIP call. You know, John can call Jeff, and that's basically all the call can do. Now, when you're dealing with a conference bridge and other stuff like that, it gets a little bit more complicated. Could you imagine trying to set up a conference bridge to make an announcement through all your speakers? That would be a real pain. So that's where Multicast comes in. Multicast gives the capability for all endpoints that are on the same local area network to receive a message simultaneously and play it. And it's an open protocol that I spoke a little bit about earlier that's widely supported in CyberData products with both our SIP paging server and the Multicast microphone, as well as just about any off-the-shelf VoIP phone. You know, your Yealink, your Grandstream. Your Poly phones do it a little bit differently, but we do support paging directly from them. So Multicast is really the best way to go and make announcements through multiple speakers simultaneously. And the Multicast also gives you the capability of having those announcements also play through your regular desk phones. So it's a really, really powerful protocol and a great way to get paging across to multiple speakers. Finally, there is InformaCast if you do end up opting for one of our InformaCast-enabled speakers. And that would be either the 011396 for the one-way speaker, or for the TalkBack variant, that would be 011400. Do keep in mind that to utilize the capability of InformaCast, you do need to have a single-wire InformaCast server on your network to be able to make those announcements. So that is one, important prerequisite. Typically, that was kind of bundled with Cisco Call Manager, although now it is branching out a little bit more and is a little bit more accessible to those non-Cisco Call Manager users. But typically, when you're running into InformaCast, that's really more for larger enterprise companies or universities, just because InformaCast is kind of developed around emergency notification, with not only audio-based notification, but text-based notification, and then even SMS notification, which makes it a really, really powerful service. And all our speakers can tie into that functionality, of course, if you opt for the InformaCast-enabled version. If you decide down the line you do want to add the InformaCast capable features to our products, we do have an upgrade path for that that's available if you contact our support department. Now, to kind of go through the actual setup process, we've discovered that we've talked about this in other videos, but we'll briefly cover this here. So, to set up the primary extension, you would use the primary SIP extension, which would be pictured here on the left-hand side. I've got shown here for the primary SIP server, anyvoipsystem.com is just as an example. I don't really know if that's a proper platform. But any of our products can take a FQDN or fully qualified domain name, as well as just a standard IP address if you're doing something local, say 3CX or FreePBX. If you're just doing a local system, you can use just a regular IP address. Then you've got your primary SIP user ID and your primary auth ID, and those are going to be platform specific. Sometimes they're just repeated, as I have pictured here, just the extension number for it, but it really varies per platform. So check our documentation on that. And then finally, you've got the password. And again, the primary SIP extension pictured here on the left-hand side is used for voice paging, so when you actually need to make an announcement. On the right-hand side, we've got our Nightringer extension. Again, I've got anyvoipsystem.com as our SIP server, and that's where we'll actually be sending our registration to. And the same process goes for the user ID and the authentication ID. It really depends on the platform. Sometimes it can be just the extension number repeated, or sometimes it's different. It really depends on the particular platform. Both of these extensions can be used simultaneously, so you can still use the regular primary extension for your voice paging and the Nightringer extension at the same time. And since this is a SIP-enabled product, and SIP is SIP, we're going to work with just about any phone system out there. We might not have documentation for all the different phone systems out there, but since it's SIP, we're pretty much going to work. There's lots of other useful features that we have on this page, like the SIP transport protocol. If you're doing anything with hosted, a lot more providers are switching to TLS for the actual SIP transport. And that's just basically encrypted SIP messages as they go across the public internet to get to that particular phone server. And for those that do want to use TLS, we do support TLS version 1.2, 1.1, and 1.0 if you do want to use that. Finally, down here at the bottom, we've got the monitor user ID. And the monitor extension is kind of a special extension that we have only for our Talkback speaker variants. The monitor mode extension is kind of a special extension where it allows you to call into the speaker, and it actually doesn't make the speaker itself active. Only the microphone is active. So it allows you to listen in on what's going on in that particular speaker. So they can be really, really useful, say, for teacher evaluation. Say you get a new teacher at a particular school, and the principal doesn't have time to go around to all the different classrooms and sit in for 5-10 minutes for that particular teacher's lecture. They can, of course, just call in to the monitor mode extension, and there won't be any blinking light on the speaker. You won't see the call button blinking. They'll have no notification that the monitor mode is actually being used and they're being listened to. Although, if you're going to opt for that option, do make sure to consult the recording and privacy laws of your particular state. There are some states where that kind of capability would be illegal. So it is good to verify with your local state laws just to protect that. Your HR department would probably be very helpful at determining if you can use that type of a feature. So next we get to setting up multicast. So as I was saying, multicast is an extremely powerful feature to go and make pages across multiple endpoints simultaneously. So as we have pictured here, I've got 4 different groups configured. We've got the topmost group, which is priority 9, listed as emergency. Emergency works a little bit differently, and we'll cover that after we cover everything else, just to kind of explain the volume capability of the emergency. But since it's ranked as priority number 9, any emergency notification or emergency multicast that is received will play over all other audio sources. So that would be any of the other priorities for multicast, even that all school page, a SIP call, or a night ringer, say if that's in a ring group, or even an InformaCast message. If something comes in at priority 9, that will play over anything else. And subsequently, that's treated as you move down the priority list. SIP calls are treated as priority 4.5, so a SIP call will play over any priority 0 through 4 multicast that's received, but will be superseded or be played over by any priority that's between 5 and 9. So if you're making higher priority pages, it's always good to understand where the SIP call and any multicast would come in when you're trying to decide the best way to page to those different areas. All of our products support 10 different multicast groups, of course, with priority 9 being the 10th option and priority 0 being the first option in that ranking there. We do have other options that you can enable for the different multicast groups, such as buffer, beep, or relay. For buffer, what that does is it has the speaker actually record the multicast stream that it receives, and once that stream has concluded or finished, the buffered audio will play. So it's a good way to make announcements if you have speakers in the area where you're going to be making that announcement. That way you don't get the feedback loop when you're dealing with that particular multicast page. Beep is pretty simple. That's just a regular beep tone that's played at the beginning of the multicast page, so that way people around the speaker know to listen that there's some kind of a notification coming through. It's always a really powerful feature to use anytime that you're going to be making any kind of announcements, just so that way people hear that tone and they know that something's going on. Finally, we've got the relay option. And what that does is it just triggers the onboard relay of the speaker, which is then connected to something else, and it can do something. So for example, if I did have the relay option checked for the emergency page, which we can kind of cover now in a little bit more in depth, the onboard relay of the speaker could trigger. And that could be useful, say, if a speaker was in close proximity to a fire panel. So if somebody made that emergency announcement, we could trigger our onboard relay, and since we're connected to a fire panel, that fire panel could take some particular action based on the relay circuit being closed. So depending on the capability of that fire panel, it could trigger a fire alarm throughout the campus. It could call the local fire department. The possibilities are really endless when you're dealing with a relay closure there. It's really just it's dependent on the endpoint that we're connected to. But more about the priority 9 option with emergency, we created that one as a true emergency option. So any multicast that is received at priority 9 will always play at max volume, regardless of your settings. So if you have it set through the web interface to only play at volume level 4, or you've got the volume scrolly wheel on the speaker itself set to say, medium volume, it will override any of those volume settings and always play at max volume. That's done by design, so that way you know that if an emergency announcement is made, that will be heard by everyone in the facility, and you won't have one of those scenarios where, a little punk teenager went and turned down the scrolly wheel on the speaker, and that way you couldn't hear that there was a fire going on, or, God forbid, a shooter on campus. So that's one of the reasons that we designed the emergency priority to work in this style of a function here. And everything on the multicast page in terms of address and port is configurable. You can change these values if desired, but I just wanted to use our standard CyberData defaults that we have here. It's always good to change these, since these are, kind of our defaults, and we do publish these. So it's always better to be safe than sorry. You wouldn't want, some teenager that knows a little bit about networking to be able to get in on your phone network and make an announcement, screw up a whole day, say if you got state testing or something going on. So it's always good to change from the default values. but it is configurable. You don't have to if you don't want to, but it is an option if you do choose to take so. So next we'll get to InformaCast, and of course this is only going to be relevant for our InformaCast enabled products, but typically when you're setting up anything on InformaCast, they're going to use SLP, or Service Location Protocol. And what that is it's basically a way for a device to actually discover where the server is automatically, literally meaning plug and play. If you have your network set up properly, you plug in the speaker will discover the InformaCast server, download its configuration file, and be ready to go. All you'll have to do is add the speaker to your system and add it into the different message groups, but it makes it a really powerful, easy way to go and get the products set up and ready for InformaCast. If, depending on the network configuration, you don't have the capability to use SLP, SingleWire is coming up with a couple different ways to get around the issue of not being able to use SLP, but for the time being, we do have a way to actually point our products directly to the InformaCast server with our InformaCast server field that's located on our device page. And what that allows is you punch in basically the full string to get to the configuration file that the speakers will use. And the speakers, instead of doing the SLP request to find that location, they'll just know where it is because that's already been configured and go directly there. So it does take a little bit more work to get the speakers to actually connect to InformaCast, but if you're dealing with an environment where it's not possible to set up the SLP capability, it's a great way to get it set up, and it's not that hard to set up, especially if you're setting up multiple units. They're all going to use essentially the exact same string, so you can just type it out and then just copy and paste in all the speakers as you're setting them up. But once you get the devices to actually be discovered by InformaCast, all you need to do is add the speaker to InformaCast. And kind of funny, we're dealing with speakers, but that is the terminology that they use. They call any device, whether it's an intercom, a horn like we talked about last week, or a proper speaker, they are termed a speaker in InformaCast. So when you add the speaker to InformaCast, you of course need to set the name for that particular speaker, and we always recommend setting something that would be relevant to that area. You know, calling it speaker number 300 isn't very helpful for somebody that would be managing that in the future. But say if you name it Speaker Classroom 101, that would give the people managing the system a lot better of idea of where that particular speaker is and what groups it needs to be in. So it's always good to name them something that would be helpful as you go through and you use the system. But after that, you set simple things like the volume level for the particular speaker, which is controllable through InformaCast, and you can also set that on the messages as well. But once you do that, you're pretty much finished adding this speaker to the individual system, and then you just need to add it to message groups. And message groups are basically recipient groups where they can receive the InformaCast broadcast from the server, and they're effectively different zones where you'll just add them into, say, first grade only, the west side of the school, the office area, you know, the sales area, you know, so on and so forth. It's just different message reception groups. And any speaker can be in multiple groups. I'm not certain if there's a limit for how many groups your particular speaker can be in. So you get a lot of flexibility and capability there. And then after you do that, basically all you have to do is start triggering messages. So messages can be triggered directly through the web portal of the InformaCast server. You just have to log into the system and pick a message to send and pick a group to send it to, and it's off. But that can be a little cumbersome, and especially if you have to sit there in front of a computer to trigger all that in an emergency scenario, that can be a little difficult. So another way that you can set it up is through trunks and particular numbers that are associated with particular message groups. So say if you need to send a fire warning, you could set that to be a particular dial code, and you just set it up in your phone system when you dial, say, 9, and then you dial whatever the prefix is for that emergency fire warning, you know, say 987. So you dial 987 to dial out to the InformaCast system, and then 987 to trigger that particular message. That's a much easier way to do it. You can just pick up a phone, 987, and then, you know, run out because the building's on fire. And that way the message will get sent. You won't have any problems there, and it's a lot easier than, oh, let me go to the InformaCast webpage. Oh, sorry, my page is loading. It's taking a long time. I can't send that emergency notification. So there's a lot of different ways to go and set it up there, and InformaCast is a really powerful service if you do opt to get it. So reason it comes with, you know, a high price point. It's very powerful. So next we get to one of the kind of unique features of our speakers, which is our audio settings page. For anybody that's familiar with CyberData products, we typically have all of our volume settings on our device page. But our device page, as it growed, as we added different relay functionality, different volume settings, that page started to get a little bloated. So we decided to spin off for our speaker page a particular audio settings page, where anything that has to do with audio is going to be done on the audio settings page, or just the audio tab as it's referred to. For non-talkback variants, it's going to look like a very bare page because it's only going to have your volume settings there. But the main reason that we designed this new page is when you're dealing with one of our talkback speakers, where you'll get the image that we have pictured here on the right-hand side. So to quickly go through all of the different options that we have here, and then we can spend a little bit more time in depth talking about the talkback capability. On the upper left-hand side of the page, we've got our volume settings, and our volume settings all use a 0 through 9 scale, 0 meaning off and 9 meaning max volume. So that way you get the individual capability to set your SIP volume to one volume, your multicast to another, or even your push-to-talk volume to a different volume. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, whereas the standard volume control wheel, just that nice little analog scrolly wheel on the front of the speaker, is kind of a global setting, where if you say have it set to half power, your SIP volume, your multicast, your ring volume is all going to be at that same level, excluding the emergency level, which will of course always play at max volume. Typically, we do recommend to disable the volume wheel control, just because kids will be kids, and especially, if you're dealing with teenagers, if there's a wheel that can move, the kids are going to play with it. One would hate for any kind of announcements to be made and then not to be heard, especially if there's some kind of an emergency announcement. So we always recommend disabling the volume control wheel if you like, which you can do with just a little checkbox here on this page. But if not, you can just use the regular volume wheel. And then we've got the test audio button that's located right next to that. So that way you can just go and test the audio level as you go through and play with it, which gives you a good idea of the difference, say, between 4 and 5 or 6 and 7. Next, down at the bottom left-hand corner, we've got what we call our audio health check. And this is an exclusive feature that right now only exists on our standard SIP speakers, but we'll probably be porting this over to pretty much any CyberData device that has both a microphone and a speaker. And what this does is, depending on how you have it scheduled, say once a day, once a week, once a month, every couple hours, it gives you the capability to, gives the speaker the capability to play a series of tones and record those tones back. And that way, it can tell you a variable level of the speaker's health. So that way you can tell, okay, my pages sound good, but I was noticing, when Jeff in the front office makes some announcements, he's got kind of a low voice and his audio sounds kind of garbled. Well, if you run the audio health check, you could notice, okay, hey, maybe there is a problem with the lower audio bands that are used, so maybe I should reach out to CyberData support and open an RMA to have one of our speakers inspected. But it's just a good way to know that your speakers are doing well. It's just a good way to know if you need to reach out to our support department for any assistance with your speakers. If this is a feature you don't really want to schedule, you can always just hit the Run Audio Health Check button right there at the bottom left-hand corner of the page, and it gives you a good idea, and it'll just go and run the test, and that way you'll know preliminary, how good the speaker is. If you get a good rating on it, you might not need to schedule it, or you might say, hey, this isn't very good, or it's not looking good. Let's, run the health check on some kind of an interval to just monitor that speaker. Next, we'll move on to the microphone settings up in the top right-hand corner. The microphone settings are very similar in a rating scheme to our standard volume settings, where they use a 0 through 9 scale, 0 meaning off and 9 being extremely sensitive. And that you can set individual microphone gains for both the standard gain, which would just be used in a regular audio configuration, or a push-to-talk option. So that way you get a little bit of flexibility depending on what environment you're going to be using the microphone in. We've of course got a boost capability as well. If you're dealing with kind of a larger area and you really want to have a sensitive microphone, you can boost it either 1 or 2 times for a total boost of 40 decibels, which makes that microphone real sensitive. You could probably hear a pin drop with that thing. But then finally, as we come down here towards the bottom right-hand side, we'll get into, frankly, the more complicated option for the TalkBack capability and really why we created this page. So when you're dealing with our TalkBack speakers, there's a variety of TalkBack options, which we've kind of discussed, to actually use the speaker in. You can, of course, use the standard full duplex option, which is very akin to like a standard speakerphone conversation. You know, you're talking on your iPhone, your buddy comes over, and you all want to talk, so you hit the speakerphone button, and then you can just talk to people. So that's how that one works. The full duplex, we typically recommend, if you're using the full duplex capability, to also take advantage of the AEC, the acoustic echo cancellation or canceller. And basically what that does is it will compensate for the size of the room to go and give you, to eliminate any echo that can occur from the speaker producing audio, it being reflected by a wall, and it being picked up by the microphone of the speaker itself. So it's a good way to cancel out some echoes that will get there. There still will be echoes inherently, and that can just be because of, frankly, the way that the speaker's designed. There's maybe half an inch in between the big diaphragm of the speaker and the microphone that we use. So with just that close proximity of the speaker and the microphone, there's just inherently going to be some echo when you're dealing with any of our TalkBack speaker products, which is why we've got a wide variety of other TalkBack options if you find there's just too much echo and it's hard to have a proper conversation with one of the speakers. And the first one that we'll talk about is the Vox option. Vox, or voice operated switch, is kind of a capability that came about with standard analog speakers, where the speaker would be used to make announcements and driven one way, and then the speaker itself, literally just the standard speaker, can actually be used as a microphone to send that audio back to whoever is calling that individual speaker. This is old analog tech, really, really cool stuff, and it's still used in a lot of IP devices today. So when you opt into using Vox mode, what that does is it makes the caller on the phone side of the call, so just for the explanation of users, you've got somebody that's on the phone side, think your front office, they're calling in to make an announcement in a classroom, then you've got the people around the speaker, and those are the students and the teacher. So when you opt into Vox mode, it makes the user on the phone side in that front office the dominant user. So that way, anytime that they talk, it will shut off the microphone of the speaker, and the speaker will play any audio. Then, depending on the switching delay, which you can see here, it's kind of grayed out because I don't have that one enabled in our screenshot here, but it's set to a delay of 500 milliseconds, which is about, fifth of a second, I think. It's pretty short. But basically what that allows is it gives it a little bit of time in between the person on the phone side talking and then the speaker shutting off and the microphone being enabled. Half a second for that. Yeah, half a second, 1,000 milliseconds per second. So 500 is half a second. Math. But for the Vox switching delay, basically that allows for the right amount of time for a user to stop talking on the phone side and for the microphone to become active on the speaker side. And you'll want to adjust this depending on how the people talk, just in that particular area. If you've got people that are typically take a lot of pauses that would make announcements, it's not really typical here in the States. We usually all just, talk, and we just ramble on. There's not really too many pauses, but in other places of the world, sometimes there's a pause of, 1 or 2 seconds as they're thinking and considering and, before they talk. So you can adjust that Vox sensitivity delay, which will make the one side a little bit more dominant. Then we've got the switching sensitivity, which is measured in negative decibels, and that's basically how loud somebody needs to talk on the phone side for the speaker to detect that and then switch off to the speaker being active and the microphone not being active. So again, to just kind of summarize how Vox works, when the person on the phone side talks, it makes the speaker active. When they stop talking, the speaker becomes inactive and the microphone becomes active, which allows the people in that classroom example to then begin talking, and then the person on the phone side can hear those people. And then after they both, one side says one thing, the other side says the other, then they can kind of continue to talk in that style of a manner. This is very useful for things like, say, kitchens or even classrooms, really places where it wouldn't be advantageous for somebody to walk over and press a button to enable push-to-talk, which will be our next subject that we'll get to here. So for push-to-talk, there's two different ways that you can use push-to-talk with one of our speakers. We do sell an accessory button that can be wired into one of the speakers to not only generate a call directly from the speaker, so that makes it really capable to call back to the front office, but it also gives the capability for that push-to-talk. So for push-to-talk, it's pretty simple. When you're on the phone side and you're talking, you don't need to press any buttons. But then if you're if you're around the speaker, you need to press the button to talk, push-to-talk. So if you're experiencing using one of these push-to-talk speakers, basically you don't press the button to listen, and then when you want to talk, you press the button, and what that does is it turns the speaker off and turns the microphone on. So that way both parties can talk to each other, and that will rule out the feedback that you'll get from just a standard full duplex conversation. So these are really useful for things like classrooms or even detention rooms, or really anywhere that you would want to generate a call from the speaker. Could be used in a cafeteria. You know, there's lots of different applications to use something like that. But sometimes, say if you're dealing with a kitchen, it's not really ideal for your cooks, you know, that are sitting there trying to make lunch for everybody, or, you know, just making a meal, to go over and start pressing that button. You know, say if they're cutting chicken or, you know, dealing with some kind of meat, you're dealing with all those contaminants on your hand. You don't want to have them walk over and start pressing a button on there. It's going to get the button all dirty. They're going to contaminate anything. People can get sick. That's just not a good idea. So the other option for push-to-talk is what we call DTMF push-to-talk, where it's actually controlled by the phone side, and the users around the speaker don't need to do anything. And this is done by utilizing the pound and the star key actually on the handset itself. So you would press pound to listen and then star to talk. So that way you can make the announcements and everything is controlled by the phone itself. So it's a really powerful feature, and that way you can kind of have the push-to-talk controlled by either side. If you want the push-to-talk controlled by the speaker side, get that accessory button. If you want the push-to-talk be controlled by the phone side, just use the DTMF option. So with this huge variety of push-to-talk options, your Vox, your AEC, your standard full duplex, it gives you a lot of capability to use the Talkback speakers. It makes them really, really flexible and applicable for just about any environment. Although we don't really recommend Talkback speakers in gymnasiums, but that's a whole other story. So the next thing that, you know, one big selling point for the speakers is their support for different accessories. So of course, like I mentioned before and we saw in the installation diagram, we do have an accessory clock kit that can come with the speakers. So this is really great for break rooms or classrooms, really anywhere that you would need to not only get announcements, but also know what time it is. So we actually have we've got a couple of these spread around CyberData. We've got one in our break room, one in the engineering area, one upstairs in kind of the sales and secondary engineering area. So they're really, really powerful and good, useful capability there. Although using the clock kit does kind of limit what other accessories you can use, because the strobe kit will actually use that same connection. So of course at CyberData we make, you know, both standard speakers and standard full SIP compliant strobes that can register with your phone system. But if you've got a speaker, you might as well get a strobe kit, because if you think about it, when's that strobe going to be active? Really only in ring groups. So okay, you'd probably be using the night ringer extension as well. And the nice thing is the strobe kit can actually plug into the speaker itself. And then anytime that the speaker makes an announcement, if it's that night ringer, if it's the primary paging extension, Multicast, or even InformaCast, if you've got the InformaCast variant, the strobe can blink a particular color. And the nice thing with our strobes is we use full RGB LEDs, so that way you can pick any particular color you want. You don't have to change any lenses. If you want green, if you want blue, if you want mauve, purple, pink, what have you, you can pick your particular preferred RGB color value. So it makes it really powerful to get these different colors, and you can also have multiple colors. So you can have your emergency announcements be nice and red. You can have your night ringer colors be green. You can have different colors for different styles of announcements, so that way people can tell not only, oh, I'm hearing the ringtone, that means one of our phones is ringing, I should run over to my desk, but they could also see that nice green blinking light. So it gives them a lot of capability for that. Next, one of the big sellers and one of the big reasons I always recommend when I'm kind of helping doing pre-sales for people to consider one of our standard SIP speakers is the analog speaker options. So any of our standard SIP speakers can power one analog speaker. So that makes it really, really powerful for kind of larger cafeteria areas or larger office areas. So that way you don't have to get, say, an individual speaker, SIP speaker for every particular location. You can do one SIP speaker and one analog speaker, which really helps reduce the cost. But one other great application for the standard SIP speaker and the analog speaker is bathrooms. You're always going to need to be able to have announcements heard in bathrooms. You know, if it's some kind of an emergency announcement, or they're looking for somebody because somebody brought their lunch for them, or they got a flower delivery, you know, what have you, you're going to need announcements in bathrooms. Now, instead of going and getting, you know, two regular SIP speakers to put in each bathroom, that's going to be a little expensive if you're dealing, you know, with those. You can do one SIP speaker in one bathroom, and if the bathrooms are located right next to each other, you can just run the cable along and put your analog speaker in that other bathroom, which really helps save cost there. So it's a really, really powerful feature. However, if you're going to be doing anything in bathrooms, don't do the talkback. Nobody wants to listen to that. And finally, like we were discussing, we've got the remote call button option. And this has gone through a couple different evolutions since I've been here with CyberData. We've changed the buttons from, you know, a smaller button to a bigger button, and then we moved to this new smaller profile remote call button, which I think looks really nice. It's got a really nice big button on there that gives a nice little satisfying click when you press it. I never thought that, you know, when we were trying to pick different buttons, we'd go through and do a push test and see how the click sounds, but that is so important when you're dealing with a button. So, of course, you can wire and connect the remote call button to our standard SIP speaker, which, like I was saying before, allows the capability to actually generate a call from the speaker, but it also gives that capability, if you're using it in push-to-talk mode, to toggle between the talk and listen mode with the speaker through the through the remote call button. So it's a really, really powerful option, and a lot of these accessories can be used together. You can use the analog speaker, the strobe kit, and the remote call button all together if desired. However, if you're throwing in that clock kit there, that does take the same port connection that would be used by the strobe kit. So if you're going, it's kind of a clock kit or a strobe kit. You can't do both, unfortunately. But between those, so if you're doing the clock kit, you can still do that analog speaker and the remote call button if you want. So it makes it really, really powerful for, you know, adding to different accessories. So finally, is the SIP speaker the right choice? With all the accessory support and the capability to run a second analog speaker off one speaker, it makes it a really economical choice where you can really reduce cost by kind of not really daisy chaining, but having a SIP speaker and analog pairs instead of just going a SIP speaker for every individual spot. That will really drive up the price. But if you pair a SIP speaker and an analog speaker together, it makes it a really economical choice. Next, they have a lot of different mounting options. You know, if you're going to be mounting with a regular ceiling tile or a wall mount or even a conduit mount, it gives you a lot of capabilities to mount the speakers in different environments. So that makes it a great option to go in basically any indoor environment. And then also, kind of like we just discussed, it's got a lot of accessory support. You know, if you're dealing with, say you need a strobe for visual notification, you want a call button to be able to make full duplex or push-to-talk calls. Very, very powerful there. So you get a lot of good features with the speakers, but as you're adding in a lot more accessories, it can make the installation kind of complicated. You know, especially say when you're dealing with multiple ceiling tile drop-ins and, you know, an area where you do have to have the seismic ties in, that's a lot of eye bolts to deal with. There's a lot to consider. So installation can get a little complicated, especially if you're throwing in a lot of different accessories. So that is, you know, I was really kind of struggling to find downsides for the speakers. Wasn't as easy as, say, last week where there were no accessory supports for the IP66 horn. But for the SIP speaker, they can be a little complicated to integrate and a little complicated to install. But overall, I think they're a really good choice for any kind of indoor announcements.
Thank you for watching this edition of Cyber School. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from CyberData.